What's up, Star Wars fans? We're the Hills Maniacs, and today we're going to be giving our thoughts on the most recent live action Star Wars series, Season 1 of Andor. So, what did you think of this season, especially knowing that there's another season coming up in a few years' time and everything else? What did you think of the series?
I mean, when I first heard that they were making an Andor series, the first thing that popped in my head was, yay.
Yeah, mine too. It was like, why do we want to see
why?
a series
But then
about
watching
Cassian
this,
Andor?
I think it was one of the best series that they've had. I really do. Like, I didn't think we would need a series about Cassian Andor, and yet I'm okay with having a series about Cassian Andor.
See, here's the thing. The way they used this series was, it sort of, I mean, it's about Cassian Andor, but they also used it to sort of build up other things that are going on with the Empire and everything
Minus
else.
the Mon Mothma stuff.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
That didn't
but
build nothing.
I like that they at least gave us a look into how the Empire is starting to realize that there is a rebellion starting to rise up. They mention about all these other things going on throughout the galaxy, not just the stuff with Andor and these little small communities and everything else.
Yeah.
I just think it ties into Star Wars nicely, obviously, and it gives us a look that we haven't really seen in any other series necessarily. Like, we actually got it from the point of view, because there were a lot of major scenes in this series that were from the perspective of people that work for the Empire and stuff. And I like that we got their view and the realization that things are going on.
Yeah.
They're starting to learn about all these different things, and one of them wants to investigate all of them, all these things that are going on, because she's finding a connection to them. And some of the other people are like, these are just random spurts, like things just happening. It's no big deal. Don't worry about it. So I like that we got that
technically connected.
Right, and I like that we got the tension there as well. Like, it almost could have been like its own series just from those things as well. Like, we get this look into how the Empire deals with this this sort of thing where, like, they're arguing with each other, or they don't believe that there's anything. Some of them don't believe that there's stuff going on, and some of them do, and who do you follow in that regard? And so it kind of showed the tension within the Empire. Those were some of the best moments, in my opinion, from the series, not just the stuff that Andor was doing, really. But I think it did, like, at least, it kind of shocked me, like, just with the, how the story went, I guess. Like, I didn't expect it to be this quality. Like, a lot of the acting was really good in this series, just like it was in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series as well.
Yeah.
I feel like they really... some of it was, I've heard people say it was better than some of the movies. Just a couple of these episodes at least, like the stuff with Andy Serkis and everything in this series.
It was really good.
There was really, you get all the emotion and everything else, and all the people played their characters really well. And that kind of took me by surprise a little bit. I didn't know what to expect, going into this show and everything else.
Well, I mean, and I feel the same, because it's like, this is the first kind of Star Wars series that we've had where you've had this kind of emotion behind it. Obi-Wan, there was emotion because it was him and Vader and things were happening. But it had Jedi, it had fight scenes, it had all this, So it would be more kind of like a movie, more compared to the movies when you think about it. Whereas, like, Mandalorian was more of just kind of like an adventure thing and didn't really have that emotion to it right away until later on when he, Grogu leaves and then he has to get him back and stuff. And then Book of Boba Fett.
No, not really talk about that.
And then, like, even Ahsoka will have Jedi and fighting and all kinds of stuff in it. So this one, I think, for not having Jedi or any type of really Force-sensitive person in this show, and not really relying on the need for Jedi or the Force or things like that I mean, there could be somebody Force sensitive, we don't know, but nobody confirmed to have it. There's no Grogu, there's no Ahsoka, there's no Luke, none of that. I think that's what makes this series work, because this is truly just emotion of random citizens in the Empire that don't agree with the way the Empire is working, and so they kind of rebel against them. And I think what we don't understand from Star Wars is how impactful that these other people truly were to the rebellion, because we were meant to focus on Luke and Leia and Rey and all of them throughout especially the originals, and then even now the sequel trilogy. And it was more of the focus on the Jedi, or like the Force sensitives of the series, as the leaders of the rebellion. When in reality, it was people like Cassian, like Mon Mothma, like Leia or Admiral Akbar that didn't use lightsabers at first.
Right,
at
they
least
just
for
sort
Leia.
of sparked
They just kind of
themselves.
and they believed in something different than what the Empire stood for, and so they fought for it. And that's what we see in this, especially with Cassian's adopted mother, Marva, in this show. She was, even though she was older and couldn't do the things she wanted, she basically instilled in Cassian what is right, and or what she believed to be right, so that when he grows up, he will be able to then take that and use it to lead people against the Empire. And that's what we see basically throughout this, is that Cassian didn't want to be like thrown into this. He thought his mother was just delusional. And then by the end of the series, he comes around to realize how important what she taught him actually was. And I kind of like that.
Right, and it made it feel more like human too. Like that's what a lot of these last couple series have really done. It's not just the sci-fi adventure. You get the real like human aspect to it as well. And I like that they also use all these different shows that they've had to show us a different side of Star Wars, not just the same planets and the same characters and everything else. We get a look into all these other characters that we may not have even suspected or even thought about in the first place, like Cassian Andor. But we don't get a look into all these, like, sort of, I'd say, like, almost background characters kind of thing. Yeah. Like, because the characters in Rogue One, like, did we really think we were going to ever see a series with those after that movie? Because they were meant to be one-off characters that did something impactful to the Empire, or to defeat the Empire and everything else, or to lead to what happened in A New Hope and stuff. But seeing a series like this, where we start to see the beginnings of the rebellion, just made that feel more, down to earth, and this more realistic thing. Like, this could happen in real life, not with, like, obviously, like, with spaceships and all that stuff, but, like, people protesting against governments and things like that. We see that in life all the time. Even there were riots in 2020 and 2021 and all that kind of stuff. Just with different things that go on, there's always people trying to rise up against the tyranny and the things that they don't believe in and everything else. You see that in real life, and I like that Star Wars is going that direction with shows like this. And any upcoming, even like you said with the Mandalorian and stuff. Like, it's not just an adventure, but it's also like what do these people do in response to everything going on around them with the Empire and stuff like that, with the Jedi and all that kind of stuff. And I do like you said, that they don't show, it doesn't have to feature Jedi. Like, this gives you a look that Star Wars isn't just about the Jedi and the Force and everything else, like we've been trained to think of all these years with all the movies and stuff. They've always had some form of Jedi in it and Sith and everything else, but these are the more human characters that don't have the Force and this magic and all that kind of stuff. So I like where they're going with this kind of thing.
And I think this show really, for me at least, makes us hate the Empire a lot more than we used to, just because it shows that the Empire doesn't care. There were people that there's times where it's like you're sympathetic towards the Jedi or towards the Empire, and I understand that, like when they blow up the Death Star and kill all those just people that were just working, doing their job on the Death Star, and they just blow up because Luke, blew it up. But at the same time, it's like, now when you see this, it's like, maybe they deserved it, because maybe they weren't as innocent as you think they are, because this shows that every level of the Empire has scumbags in it, basically, because you look at Cyril Karnes, who was basically sort of a main villain in this show. He wasn't really anything in the Empire. He was just kind of a security guard on another planet that got dragged into this because Andor killed 2 of his people. and yet he ends up playing somewhat of a big role. He even saves one of the main villains of the show. He actually ends up saving, and so he basically, even though he's not a main villain or high up in rank in the Empire, he's still that scumbag that everybody loves to hate, you know. Right. And so it shows that it can go down the ladder. You don't just have to hate the Emperor and that's it. Like, he's not all that there is in the Empire. You know, even Grand Moff Tarkin in the originals, like, he was a scumbag too. And I know he's like head of the thing, but still, you know, you go down the line, you'll still find people, and there's always people that betray everybody and everything else that might not actually work for the Empire, but think it's right what they're doing, so they turn on the other the rebels. You know, we saw that in this last episode too. There was a guy that turned in Cassian. I think it was all part of the plan, but still, you know, so he ended up turning in Cassian, and it didn't work out anyways. But still, you know, you just see that scumbaggery from the top where the Emperor is, just goes down the ladder, and just everybody in the Empire can have it. You know?
In things like that with Empire and governments and all that kind of stuff, you always get that person that thinks I'm going to overthrow the Emperor someday, or I'm better than that person because he put me in charge so I can run things, but it really goes against the Emperor sometimes. So that's what I said, like, this show gave us more of an inside look into how the Empire operates. Yeah. And even especially the best parts of this series, I think, or this season at least, was when Cassian was in prison. Because it's a prison that the Empire uses. They make the prisoners build like machines and all that stuff that they use to rule the galaxy. Like, I guess, spoiler alert for the post-credits scene, all the stuff that they built was actually little parts for the Death Star, which it reveals in a post-credit scene at the end of this last episode. But it made it seem like it's just like, we're building stuff for the Empire to use, like for their ships or something, build parts for that or whatever. And I like that that's what they use. They make the prisoners, instead of killing them, like, you're going to work for us now. You're going to stay here forever and constantly be here building things for us and things like that.
Well, and that's what really makes it more emotional in this series, is that once you realize that and you see this post-credit scene, that everything that Cassian worked to build in the prison, because he was forced to, actually ends up becoming the thing that kills him on Scarif in Rogue One. He's building parts of the Death Star that end up being his demise. So in a way, it's really like a full circle type of thing. Like, he starts this rebellion just to die from the thing he, in a way, helped to create. But it also goes to show us the scale of the Death Star. Like, we knew it was huge from A New Hope and all that stuff when they flew up to it and thinking it was because he said it's too big to be a space station. But when you look at Andor and you look at what they're making, there are these giant pieces that they're making, and when they place them in the Death Star, they look like these little things. Yep. So that just goes to show you how big the Death Star actually is. And they're basically making the laser part of it, that shoot the ion cannon that shoots out the laser that destroys Alderaan. That's what they were working on, at least in this. But I mean, that's just how big that the Death Star truly is, and the fact that is what Cassian was building, and all those prisoners were building, something that ends up being a big destructive force in the galaxy, at least for a while. And that was all basically because of Andor and all of these people. I mean, they didn't do it willingly, but still, the thing that could be their demise is what they were building.
Exactly. And I like that, like I've said even earlier, how it gives us more of a look inside how the Empire operates. Well, even this prison and stuff with them, we get to look at how they build their things. They make these prisoners do it. Maybe not even just the parts of the Death Star, but just like other things as well. And that's why it has to be done like they're forced to make it so quickly and a certain pace and everything else, like constantly without stopping until like it's time. They have curfews and all that kind of stuff, and they're told when to do things and how quickly to do it and stuff like that. And that's why, because the Empire needs this Death Star to really rule over the galaxy, you know, with this huge lingering threat, like you said. So I like that we got to see how exactly they make this whole thing come together in the first place, and it's using these prisoners.
It also shows that the Empire didn't really care about who the prisoners were in the prison.
Right.
They knew that there were people making the things they needed. They didn't care who it was. They didn't care what you know, and we saw in the episodes that they basically just recycled them. When they got out of one level for their sentence being up, they just got put back into another section of the prison without anybody knowing. You know, I don't know if they wiped their memory or what, but they ended up just, and that's, you know, that's basically how the Empire works. They don't care.
I almost feel like the whole season should have been mainly around, like, Cassian does something in episode 1, and maybe in episode 2 he's on the run.
Did.
Yeah, or maybe in like episode 2 he gets captured by the Empire. We have 2 or 3 or 4 episodes of him being in the prison. Then the last 2 episodes he escapes the prison and takes down the people that, you know, and all those events still play out. This could have maybe benefited from being just a 6-episode series.
Well, I mean,
I think
you had to have
the prison stuff was the best parts in my opinion. And I've seen a lot of people say that too, like even the acting from Andy Serkis and stuff was almost Oscar worthy.
I mean, I agree, but you have to look at it as the big picture too. For these 12 episodes, we say that the stuff with Mon Mothma is pointless, and it really is. But this is also the thing that really drives her to fully join the rebellion to the point that she's at when we see her again in New Hope and the original trilogy and stuff. And you know, just knowing that Andor's actions on Aldhani when they attacked and stole the Imperial like payroll or whatever it was, and they stole money from the Empire, part of that affected her too, you know, and it affected the stuff she was doing. And so this goes to show that where the rebellion is at right now isn't a good point, because they're not working together. They're keeping secrets from each other because they don't trust each other, you know, and that's not where the rebellion is at yet. And so this kind of had to build to that point to where the rebellion is what it is in the original trilogy. And so although this whole other conversations that she's had in this show were pointless, that one scene where they attack Aldhani and steal the money really goes to show that they weren't working together, and they didn't do it on purpose. They're not like, oh, that's Mon Mothma's, let's take that. You know, they just kind of took it.
They were doing what they were told.
It also affects their own team, if you will, that they're not really a part of yet. But you know, it just goes to show both sides are struggling right now, because nobody on the side of the rebellion really trusts each other yet, because it's just a bunch of whoever's that, you know, don't agree with the Empire. And the Imperials aren't communicating with each level of their empire, so everybody's falling apart. And so when it gets to the point of A New Hope, where the Empire is this big destructive force in the galaxy that, you know, is what it is and is very strong and powerful, that's because of these events that happen in shows like this, you know, where they learn from their mistakes, the rebellion learns from their mistakes, and that's what makes them be able to fight against each other, you know, at least for the original trilogy until all the stuff afterwards happens. But that's, so I kind of like that, even though it was kind of pointless for this series. I still kind of think that it fits and shows a bigger picture if you look at it as a whole, rather than just like Mon Mothma being in the show.
I mean, do you think it worked with being 12 episodes, or do you think it could have had maybe a little less, maybe like 9 or something?
I think the 12 was fine. I think it worked. Some of them seemed kind of dragged out, but it also gave us that emotion that we talked about, you know. Like, you got to know a lot more of these characters in this show than some of the characters we got to know in, like, Book of Boba Fett or Because they just kind of, if you didn't watch Clone Wars and you watched Book of Boba Fett, you'd have no clue who Cad Bane was,
right.
or that backstory between him and Boba Fett. So that was just kind of like, okay. At least in this one, you got to know who Cassian was, you got to know who Bix was, you got to know who Marva was, you got to learn about Vel and Luthen and all even the people in the prison. Like you got attached to these characters, and you couldn't do that if you had less episodes because they would have to rush it to get everything done.
Or you just have more than 2 seasons.
I think the 12 episodes works because then I think next season you can focus on Cassian's true rebellion, kind of mentality comes out, and it leads to the events of Rogue One, and then from there you go and you know what happens in Rogue One.
Now, knowing that pretty much all of the main characters from this season survived by the end of the season, which doesn't usually happen too often. Like, yeah, some people
they've
died,
already announced the season 2.
No, but I mean, like, usually even with another upcoming season, somebody or one of the main characters usually dies. But knowing that all of them pretty much survived, what do you think is next for them? Like, do you think some of them are going to die, or are they just gonna leave and never really be referenced again because it has to lead to Rogue One, where he doesn't mention these characters in that movie?
It is obvious that they're not in Rogue One, and Cassian dies in Rogue One, so we don't know what happens after that to everybody else that's with him. I think there will be a point where a couple of them will probably die trying to save Cassian. That's usually how the story plays out. That the main character's friends. It happened in Obi-Wan. It happened in Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian, and it happens a lot in Star Wars or just movies in general where they end up risking their lives and end up dying for somebody else or for the greater good. So I think some of them might die. I don't know exactly which ones will die because I think it depends on the attitude of Cassian at that point. Like, is it going to be one of his closest friends that dies? Is it going to be Luthen, who he really doesn't like or trust at this point? Like, or is it both? How does this turn around to where he ends up, whatever? But I think a few of them at least will end up dead. We know they're not in the series. That doesn't mean they're dead. Like, Mon Mothma tells her husband to go gamble on Canto Bight, so who knows? Maybe people just go to other planets throughout this universe and just stay there.
That's what I mean.
And get a new job or something, and some of them could end up being in something else. We could see them in Ahsoka, or maybe anything that comes out later on in the series.
True.
And then they die. Then maybe some of these people fought in the Battle of Endor or even the Battle of Yavin, and we just didn't know it because they weren't characters yet. But you could see that they do that.
That's the good thing about them being like these background characters, because we don't think anything of them, especially since obviously all the movies came out a long time ago, so they wouldn't have had these characters even in their mind at all, like Cassie and Andor or any of these guys. But that's why it's good that they're background characters, because it leaves you to speculate. Like, where were they in the galaxy? I'm sure they were leading a rebellion somewhere else, maybe.
Right. We know at least one of the characters that we met in this show, Melshi, who Andor meets in the prison. We know his fate. He actually ends up dying on Scarif with Andor. Not at the same time, he gets killed before that, but he's fighting with Andor on Scarif to get the Death Star plans to Leia on the Tantive 4. And he actually ends up dying there. So that's one of the people, which he wasn't in this last episode, but that's because Andor sent him off on his own. They said to split up, but he'll find him eventually, and he'll end up working with Andor again in Rogue One. I don't think it was played by the same character or the same actor. It might have been, I don't know. But so we know what happens to him. But like these other people, like Luthen, Vel, Cinta, like I can't say for sure whether or not they die. If they end up maybe joining the Empire, if they, just go into hiding, I don't know.
Right. And one final thing we'll cover, I guess, for this video is if I was to compare it to like all the other live action series that they've done, I honestly think see, that's tough because they're all different and unique in their own way. You know, The Mandalorian has its own thing going on, and it's spawning all these spin-off series.
I wouldn't say its own
like
thing, considering it's in the book of Boba Fett too.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it has its own spin-offs and things like that from it, and things called the Mandoverse. You know, or certain these other shows that are coming out are connected to the Mandalorian,
right.
Not as much as these other shows. Then you got the Obi-Wan stuff, and now you got Andor. I'd say honestly, I think for me personally, even comparing to Mandalorian, I think the Obi-Wan Kenobi series was still the best one they've done, just because of all the. I explained it when we reviewed the whole series, so go check out that video. But I just thought that series was really like, just the way they put it together and everything else, and feeling the emotion of like what Obi-Wan is going through after his friend turned to the dark side and all that kind of stuff. I was really impressed with the work that they did on that show. I think honestly that one's the best one, and then maybe the Mandalorian right after that. I'd say this one would fit in. Obviously, Book of Boba Fett is like, it's basically It's basically still the Mandalorian.
It's that lower level that we were talking about with the Empire.
It basically still fits in with the Mandalorian, so I would categorize that as the. I'd say Andor is like third on the list, maybe, just because, like right now at least, this is the first season. Like there will be another season and stuff, and it's supposed to build to something anyways. But I just feel like those other shows were a bit better with like the story and the quality, and this one felt like there was too much. For me, I didn't really like the 12 episodes, but I feel like 9 could have sufficed maybe, and it would have still got across the same point. Because sometimes when you have too many episodes like that, there's some that you can like waste, sort of like some wasted episodes and stuff like that.
Makes sense.
I mean, they did that with Book of Boba Fett, though. There was only 6 episodes, and they wasted 2 of them with the Mandalorian stuff. But that's beside the point. I just feel like if there's less, or they don't have to cram as much in or try and extend the story out if they don't have as many episodes to work with, and that makes it better because they can either make a season 2 out of it, or you have to tell the best possible story you can within that 9 episode limit or whatever.
Right.
So compared to that, I'd say Andor is third compared to like The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi.
See, for me, I think just because of what we talked about, not just in this video, but with the other reviews of the other series, I think for me, with this not focusing on the stuff that we basically grew up knowing about Star Wars, you know, with the Jedi and the Empire and the Rebellion and all that kind of stuff, I think for me this is the best of the series, and I just the emotion that we get, and sure there's stuff that, you know, but every series has. I mean, look at Marvel, there's stuff that whatever, but if you take out the whole Mon Mothma storyline in this, so you take out that 15 minutes that she was in this series, because that's basically all it was if you add it up. But anyways, and you just look at the true like backstory behind it and the emotion and just the performances from some of the actors, like you mentioned Andy Serkis's character, with the great performance that Andy Serkis gave, and you just look at that, I think, and there's a lot of questions that come out of season 1 of Andor, and I think that's a good thing because we know where it's supposed to end up. We know it's supposed to end up with the events of Rogue One. And it's kind of like Obi-Wan, like we knew it had to lead into A New Hope, you know, but what we see before that is kind of whatever they want because there's nothing there. Yeah. So we know where Andor is supposed to lead to, and so I think that build up to the events of Rogue One I think is fine. And I liked Rogue One, so I know a lot of people didn't because they said it was like pointless or whatever. But I kind of liked Rogue One as like a backstory between episodes 3 and 4.
Right.
So to have this as the prequel to that, and I know what's supposed to happen, and I know that Cassian's supposed to die in Rogue One, and then to see the things that he sets up in this, even though, and it goes back to Stellan Skarsgård's character Luthen in one of the episodes, he said, you know, he works to build a sunrise that he can never see. That's basically exactly what Andor is doing, and a lot of these characters are doing, is that we know that he's going to die in Rogue One, and yet all this stuff that we get to see him set up, to basically make sure that the rebellion succeeds, I think is what makes this, because it gives us that emotion that we know he's gonna die, and yet we still have that hope that like he's going to survive this event because he's in Rogue One, so we know he's going to survive, but then it also gives you that sense of emotion as to like, well, what's going to happen to everybody else. So I think that's why this for me makes it the best, because it doesn't have to focus on the Skywalker stuff and it doesn't have to focus on the Jedi. It can just show you that normal people, can still fight and still have an opinion and still try to stand up for what they believe in Star Wars. And we don't see a lot of that in Star Wars because it focuses more on the Jedi and stuff. So that's why it's the top, I think, for me.
Right, but let us know what you guys think down in the comments section. Where would you rank this compared to all the other live action series that they've done, or even just any of the series in general, like Clone Wars and all that stuff? Where would you put this if you were to compare them all? Also, what did you think about the series overall? And what was your favorite episode from the whole thing? Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.
And remember, leave the scumbaggery at home, and may the Force be with you. Happy Thanksgiving.